start by standing and saying the Pledge of Allegiance. Paul Harris, would you please lead us in that? Thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. The first agenda item is approval of the December 5th and 6th, 2024, February 21st, and February 25th, 2025 meeting minutes. May I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Do you have a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Great, thank you. Next, we have 3 action items, beginning with a commending resolution for our outstanding student, Lisa Kopelnik. Lisa has continued the tradition of outstanding student members of the board. She has been invaluable to this board and to me in particular on understanding the student issues, especially a very turbulent year when you look at a world event. So I can't thank you enough for all you've done for this university. Your service will be remembered for a long time. And so I want to thank you. Amanda, will you please read the resolution?
Well, whereas, and I'm going to make sure, is it Kopelnik or Kopelnik? Okay, I wanted to be just perfect. Whereas Lisa R. Kopelnik is a 4th year from the San Francisco Bay Area, majoring in politics, honors, and economics in the College and Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. And whereas Ms. Kopelnik is a Jefferson Scholar and student leader who was the chair of the University Judiciary Committee in her 3rd year, a fellow at UVA's Blue Ridge Center, a center devoted to intellectual diversity and civil discourse, a member of the Jefferson Literary and Debating Society, active with the Jewish community on grounds, and a recipient of the Distinguished Truman Scholarship, which focuses on developing talented student leaders who intend to pursue a career in public service. And whereas Ms. Kopelnik was elected by the Board of Visitors to serve as student representative for the 2024-2025 academic year, and whereas student representative to the Board of Visitors, Ms. Kopelnik's network within the student community has made her a valuable resource to the Board of Visitors. She has served with distinction on a number of committees and task forces and advised university leadership and the board on current student issues, including student self-governance, safety and security, and ethnic and religious belonging, among others. Resolved, the members of the Board of Visitors commend Lisa R. Kopelnik for her exceptional and devoted service to the board and the university, respect her as a valued colleague, and wish her every success and happiness in all of her future endeavors.
We'll hear from Lisa in a few minutes regarding her comments, but next we have a commending resolution for our provost, Ian Baucom. We are very sad to see you leave UVA, but we are also proud of your accomplishments and wish you every success at Middlebury. Carlos, will you please read the commending resolution?
Thank you, Mr. Rector. Whereas Executive Vice President and Provost Ian B. Baucom will leave his role in March to become president of Middlebury College, 11 years after his hiring as the dean of the college and Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, and 3 years since his promotion to provost. And whereas in 2014, he was named dean of the college, where he oversaw efforts to hire 150 new faculty members and to overhaul the curriculum to better meet the needs of modern education. He also increased scholarship support for undergraduate and graduate students and spearheaded successful cross-university initiatives such as the Democracy Initiative. And whereas during his service as the university provost and chief academic officer, he reshaped the academic leadership by hiring 5 deans and a vice president for research. And whereas Mr. Baucom oversaw a significant increase in research funding, improvements to research infrastructure, including research computing, and made large investments in the 5 grand challenges: democracy, brain and neuroscience, environmental resilience and sustainability, digital technology and society, and precision medicine/health, which have advanced the research and scholarly work across disciplines and schools. And whereas his leadership was invaluable to the creation of the Paul and Diane Manning Institute for Biotechnology, which, when complete, will be the largest laboratory building in the state, anchoring a new innovation hub in biotechnology at the Fontaine Research Park. And whereas he oversaw the opening of the School of Data Science, the National Security Data and Policy Institute, and extensive renovations to academic buildings across grounds, including the Shannon Library. And whereas he worked tirelessly with colleagues to strengthen academic advising, particularly for students who have not yet declared a major. Mr. Baucom has also led and served on the university-wide committees with distinction, including the Task Force on Religious Diversity and Belonging. And whereas he has dedicated himself to faculty recruitment and retention across schools, and has deeply engaged with faculty not only with regard to routine and operational matters, but also on topics including free speech, STEM, entrepreneurship, and AI to ensure that decisions regarding resources and policies were informed by relevant expertise. And whereas he has honorably served as a trusted advisor and colleague to the president and senior leaders during times of crisis and celebration, demonstrating a deep and animating commitment to the mission of the university and never wavering from a conviction that education can change lives. And whereas he has continued his outstanding scholarship, writing 3 books and editing others, largely centering on his research specialties in colonialism, but also including Through the Skylight, a book for young readers. Resolved, the members of the Board of Visitors commend Ian Baucom for scholarship, leadership, and his exceptional and devoted service at the University of Virginia, and wish him, his wife, and his 6 children every success and happiness in all of their future endeavors.
Next on the agenda is a policy governing the compensation of student athletes for use of their name, image, or likeness. A board-approved policy is required by state code in order to administer a program in compliance with NCAA rules and current law. Jason Baum, our athletics compliance director, is here to answer any questions you may have about the policy. The policy is in the full board materials that you received last week. If anyone has a question, please offer them at this time. Jason.
Thank you, everybody. We just want to be brief that the state NIL law requires board approval, as Rector Hardy said, that any policy that compensates student athletes for their name, image, likeness. The policy language tracks with the state law. The policy will not conflict with any requirements of the House settlement if approved. And again, the state law will continue to exist. It will benefit UVA, and the language mirrors what the state law is. And happy to answer any questions if you have anything.
Any questions for Jason? Okay. If there are no questions, may I have a motion to approve the policy?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Great, thank you. Also, we have 2 motions to commend Lisa and Ian, so we need a vote on that. May I have a motion to approve those resolutions?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Great, thank you. Now we will move on to my remarks. Before I do, there was an email sent out, but I also want to make sure that we recognize the incredible accomplishment of Finance Chairman Bob Blue being named the Virginia Business Executive of the Year, which is a really phenomenal offer. The list of people who've been named Executive of the Year before that is a who's who of business people in the Commonwealth. So Bob, congratulations on that. We've had a very busy couple of months, and I want to thank you for your engagement. The rest of the semester promises to be as active, and I ask that you give our administrators a little time in working with all 17 of you. Some suggestions were made earlier today, which I think were excellent, about members who have similar questions, combining those requests to the committee chairs and the administration in an attempt to achieve efficiency. I think it's an excellent idea, and hopefully will result in you receiving the information back in a more timely manner, as the administration also runs a very complex university with difficult daily issues. I want to thank Bree Gertler and Dr. Mitch Rosner for assuming the interim provost and AVP for health affairs positions respectively. They are both exceptional leaders, and they have our appreciation for taking on these difficult roles mid-semester until we complete nationwide searches for both. If you haven't met them yet, please take a moment today to speak with them. J.J. Davis also deserves our sincere appreciation for her steadfast leadership and financial acumen that requires navigating incredibly uncertain waters right now. I also want to thank the Monticello board and staff for hosting us Wednesday night. I thought it was a really special evening for everyone attending. Dinner at night on the mountaintop cannot be replicated. We need to do more in collaboration with our UNESCO partner, irrespective of the fact that my wife Molly is the chair of the Monticello board for the next 2 years. And thank you, Jim, for your remarks about the 200th anniversary of the first classes at UVA. Jefferson faced major obstacles and challenges getting the university started, and 200 years later, we work very hard every day to make further progress on his visionary ideas about public education. Looking forward, some reminders that have been mentioned previously. On May 10th, the College at Wise will hold their commencement, which is the weekend before the UVA final exercises. We will have transportation going down, and all board members are welcome to attend. Governor Youngkin is the commencement speaker this year. I strongly encourage all board members to visit Wise and attend graduation. It is difficult to understand Wise unless you see it. Also, there will be a vice rector election at the June board meeting, which is 91 days away, and no, I'm not counting. Traditionally, we have asked members to nominate other members or themselves as candidates by calling Board Secretary Susan Harris. Carlos Brown and I have run for this position before, so we're happy to offer any advice to anyone considering pursuing this role, including reaching out to other members to let them know of your candidacy and why you want to serve in this very important role. I will offer that it is an incredibly time-consuming position. It is a full-time job, and anyone considering this role should factor in the impact it will have on your personal and professional careers. With your current responsibilities, you can expect 80 to 90-hour work weeks with late-night weekend calls that will be the norm. The vice rector discussion will occur on Friday afternoon, June 6th, and then the board will vote on the next vice rector. You heard earlier today that I'm going to be attending WISE to teach 3 days of classes with the faculty down there. I'm looking forward to being down there. As I said, it's a truly exceptional place, and the students I've met at WISE during my visits are every bit as impressive as our talented students here in Charlottesville. Finally, I want to ask each of you to strongly consider attending both days of UVA graduation this year. The Board of Visitors Statement of Responsibilities adopted by this board in 2018 offers the following responsibility of each board member. Visitors participate in the life of the university, including attending major university events. Example, fall convocation and final exercises. Final exercises are one of the most important and inspirational events of the university. I believe it is the finest final exercises program in the country. Who can top the lawn in the academical village? As a student and board member who has been to 14 and after this May, 15 UVA final exercises, as well as 3 final exercises at UVA Wise, I ask you as rector to do everything you can to attend graduation. Seeing our amazing students graduate from UVA and head off to make a huge difference in the world is something that you will never forget. Finally, we had a wonderful dinner with the coaches and athletic administrators last night, including an inspirational speech from Brian O'Connor. For your information, the women's swim dive team will be participating in the national championships March 19th to 22nd in Seattle, Washington. The team is the prohibitive favorite to win its 5th consecutive national championship. I hope you will follow the championships closely and root on the Who's. I know Jim is planning on attending, and so am I. And hopefully, after they win, we'll do a little bit better dive, or I will, than I did last year into the pool. So these conclude my remarks. I'd now like to turn it over to our student representative, Lisa Kopelnik, for her final remarks.
Thank you, everybody. For the last time, thank you, Mr. Rector, and good afternoon, everybody. It's really an honor to be here, and I wanted to thank you for your kindness and for the respect that you continue to show to the student member of the board. I give these remarks during a period of change for this university, and it is in these moments that I'm reminded of the wide-ranging and diverse viewpoints the student body holds, which brings us strength and certainty. I'm also reminded of the value of a healthy and transparent relationship between the board and the students, and the importance of honoring the commitments we have made to prioritize students with nuance and empathy. Through cultivating this relationship, my hope is that the decisions we make as a board are always grounded in the UVA reality that students are experiencing. I've spoken with students who do not feel the impact of recent headlines in their daily lives. Many students have nuanced views on these changes, including students who agree with them in whole or in part, but a large portion that has only been increasing have expressed serious concerns about their future in higher education, regardless of their political views. I've heard from PhD and graduate students who have reached out who are worried that these changes will limit our ability as an institution to conduct cutting-edge research. They are worried it will limit our ability to enroll future PhD students who will push us forward and broaden the horizons of the next generation and to attract the greatest minds to the university. I've spoken with students relying on Access UVA who are worried that cuts will affect their financial aid, limiting who can enjoy the privilege of attending this school we all love. I've spoken with international students who are worried about their access to a UVA education. Students are worried these changes will affect their sense of belonging and community here and the everyday resources they access. These are urgent and real issues, and students are looking to us to respond in ways that accord with our values, while also understanding the many responsibilities, including legal responsibilities, the board is charged with. Regardless of students' views, the consensus is the following. There are far more students that are paying attention to what the university is doing in addition to the national news, and they care that their university is reasonable, empathetic, and nuanced in their response. They care that UVA remains committed to student self-governance, specifically that student voices are included across all levels of decision-making. I have the privilege of giving these remarks on the 200th anniversary of class's beginning, though I am missing my Beatles class to be here today. What a privilege and what a reminder of how great this university truly is. In preparing these remarks, I thought about where we are today compared to 200 years ago. We're sitting in the Rotunda, originally a library that remains the heart of this university and represents the fundamental commitment Jefferson made to education, to research, and to discovery. Over the last 200 years, the university has become a powerhouse research institution, with students coming to the university to have these opportunities. I've spoken with students this semester who have built their own cars using software they've developed in UVA classrooms, who do world-class research using the telescopes at the UVA Observatory, and who conduct international research on global health and humanitarian aid, bringing UVA's mission around the world. Whether in space or abroad or here on grounds, discovery and the pursuit of knowledge is a commitment that is synonymous with UVA. And as we expand our capacity to do research with new centers and faculty, students look to the board to carry this commitment forward despite challenges that may come our way. Even after 200 years, traditions continue to shape UVA. This winter included 2 snowball fights and a snow day, where thousands of students were reminded of the work hard, play hard mentality that makes this university what it is. Students participated in the tradition of student self-governance as the student-run University Board of Elections facilitated a successful round of student elections with thousands of students voting to elect new leaders for the next year. Students are spirited, especially at our sports games, and civil discourse is still an integral part of the UVA experience. The oldest student organization on grounds, the Jefferson Literary and Debating Society, is celebrating its bicentennial this summer. The History Club has put together events to celebrate this bicentennial milestone all week, and Jeffersonian dinners are still held in pavilions on the lawn. Students are driven by service, with organizations such as the Madison House regularly hosting philanthropy and community events to raise awareness and serve different communities. Whether you're the 3rd generation in your family to come to the University of Virginia and your grandparents were taught by Professor Elzinga, or you show up to UVA for the first time on move-in day, as I did, we are all united by the magic, opportunity, and community that is Virginia. Students want to help improve UVA and recognize the people who make UVA special. Acutely aware of emerging safety concerns, students are grateful to the support from JJ and her staff and Chief Longo and his officers who aided students through both weather challenges and threats to safety. While the pressures that UVA experiences have grown exponentially in magnitude, students look to the board to know that our voices are heard, considered, and respected. We rely on each other, keeping education, research, thoughtful conversations, and joy at the heart of the university. One of the rare things every student has here is an acceptance letter from UVA. While many of you have this in your possession as well, I want to share a line from the version we have all read and taken to heart. People are fond of saying that the University of Virginia is Jefferson's university. However, it will also very much be your university. Jefferson's vision for a university accessible to all, for a university that uplifts the Commonwealth, has been expanded to include all people. Our first president's dream of a research university that serves the breadth of the community has been realized. UVA has been imagined for centuries and is as an institution that creates and shares knowledge by and for the public. Their commitment and our commitment to a diverse student body is fundamental to today's university experience. Over the course of the last several weeks, there have been a lot of focus on what's legal and lawful and what's coming out of the federal branch. It's also important to remember what the University of Virginia stands for and the community that we aspire to have. Community spaces and resources for different students matter, and they shape the everyday lives of students. We as board members have the honor of being faithful stewards of this mission so that 2 more centuries of Virginia students may have the privilege of attending UVA and meeting people that they never would have met otherwise, and whose lives are shaped by the different perspectives and life experiences they encounter. Students rely on the good governance of the board. They look to the board for support and an effort to understand. They depend on board members to be independent and stay true to UVA's values and community of trust. The trust that we share is what makes the community at this university meaningful, as you all have experienced, and that includes the trust between the board and the students. As I reflect on this meeting being my final meeting, I wanted to thank you all very sincerely for your service to the university and for the service you have demonstrated throughout your lives. I've learned so much from each of you, even if we have disagreed at times, which is what I believe Jefferson envisioned. In every conversation I have with students, I aim to demonstrate your dedication to this university, and I know how much you love this place. The next student member of the board shares deeply in your love and commitment to this university, and I feel fortunate that you will have an incredible partner in your work and that students will have such a strong representative. I wanted to further thank the administration for their immense efforts and needed vision for the university, especially for students. I wanted to thank my family and friends who have supported me in this role, and to the student leaders I've had the honor of serving with, who have changed the university for the better. I wanted to thank the students who inspire me every single day and who are the heart of this university. It has been an honor to represent you, and you've made my job the greatest job to have. I feel grateful that I will be an alumna of a university that truly values its students, enough to develop them as thinkers and leaders, and that is in part thanks to you. When I was choosing where to go to college, my dad told me, "It sounds like if you come to Virginia, you won't regret it." And boy, was he right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa. You will be missed. Now we'd like to turn it over to Faculty Senate Chair Jim Lambert, who is the Janet Scott Hamilton and John Dowman Hamilton Professor and Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rector Hardy. Thank you, members of the board. Thank you. I want to send appreciation of the Senate for engaging with each and all of our 3,000 faculty and 83 senators in both the formal and informal settings. It's so important as we invent and evolve our philosophies and advance as artists, scientists, and scholars. First, I'd like to describe some timeline of the Senate's activities that many of you know, but it's worth reminding. We meet once a month in the full Senate, and we've been moving across the real estate of the university. From the comm school at Darden School, we've met for the first time at the School of Data Science 2 months ago, and we meet regularly at the School of Education and Human Development. We're trying to do better to move the faculty around, and because the Senate is a special place. It's not usual for any of us to interact and engage with the other schools, and the Senate is one of those ways we meet one another. We have had hosted the president of the university, the provost, the vice president for research, the federal relations director, Carla Williams, director of athletics, and we have School of Medicine upcoming at our March 21 meeting. We've had 3 listening sessions and counting on events that have been discussed here in the Board of Visitors. All faculty are excited to have their voices heard. In sponsored research, of course, the individual faculty are experiencing suspensions, pauses, and unpauses of grants, and sometimes they'll receive a grant they never dreamed could happen in February and March of 2025. So please think of them as they're in an entrepreneurial mode, seeking to support their students and advance the curriculum through their research. As faculty chair, and I speak for the other Senate leaders, we accept every invitation and are grateful to have been part of the various dedications and committees, search committees, and others. This week, I attended, along with Senate leaders, a presentation here in the Rotunda by the ambassador from Finland to the United States. She had previously been the ambassador from Finland to China and the ambassador from Finland to Israel. So what incredible experience. And this is the place that we're fortunate to have such eminent people come through. And I believe we encourage all our students, faculty to take advantage of that. It's as an important place. In the past year, since approximately July 2024, Harvard University has been constituting a faculty senate for the first time. And our senate has been very curious and observant of what's going on there because they are essentially bringing it about from first principles. And prior to this, they had a belief that each and every school was so eminent they may not have needed to meet together and collaborate. So we're wondering how much they're learning from UVA and how much we can benefit from their movement in that direction. Also this week, I sat with students, as did our administrators with Phi Psi brothers at the hospital, where we have a student with a dire illness, meningitis. It's something all the faculty are thinking of. I want to bring to this group's attention, and maybe it's already there, our, in a way, cousin university, partner university, University of Edinburgh. It was founded about 25 years before the Commonwealth of Virginia came about in 1583. They are, in the month of February 2025, making cuts on the order of 140 million pounds per year in their operating budget. That's about $180 million per year. So our faculty are looking to a situation like that and wondering how could it happen and what are the paths forward for their continuing to be excellence and leading among world universities. Edinburgh had the Edinburgh Seven. They were the first 7 women undergraduates in the 1860s across UK universities. Their faculty included Thomas Bayes, James Clerk Maxwell in my field. He's the a discoverer of electromagnetism, Adam Smith, Francis Hutcheson, of course, all influential to the founding of this university, Thomas Jefferson, and many of our first faculty were alums of Edinburgh University. Among the excellence of Virginians and the University of Virginia is coping with change and ambiguity, even bringing about such change and ambiguity. We debate humane values in the Senate and among our citizens, and we support nascent democracies worldwide against authoritarianism and to limit human suffering. We're in a moment in 2025 where machine intelligence and automation is bringing about dramatic change inside the universities, but it's even occurring, I believe, at a faster pace outside the universities. And Northern Virginia is playing a tremendous role in that. So it's been a topic of discussion in the Senate. And our question is, how will such automation and technologies help us in shared governance, including of this university? Last, I want to tell you about one of my heroes. I'm a Richmonder originally, Arthur Ashe, one of the most eminent individuals, Virginians of the 20th century. He left us a treasure. His book, Days of Grace, it's an autobiography. It described, among others, it's a very mathematical book, how grateful he was to be 1 in 100 on the playground, 1 in 1,000 champion of Wimbledon, US Open, Davis Cup coach, and the rest. He said he was happiest in his career when he was paid for his victories. And for this group, when he joined, he said he was least happy when he joined a board and was remunerated at a fixed income. But I want to tell you something special. I visited his website at UCLA. He had to leave Virginia for school. He attended University of California, Los Angeles. There's a website at the UCLA dedicated to Arthur Ashe. And there is a poem from his favorite novel. He described in Days of Grace, he read this novel, the glass bead game on the sides of the tennis courts. Those of you who know the novel, it has some poems by the main person of the novel. It says, "As all youth departs, so life at every stage departs, and so does every virtue or talent. So does our grasp of truth." What a deep statement. It blooms in its day and may not last forever. Since life may summon us at every age, be ready, our heart, for parting, new endeavor, be ready bravely and without remorse to find new light that old ties cannot give. In all beginnings dwells a magic force for guarding us and helping us to live. Arthur Ashe was when he passed, he was his body was held at the governor's mansion in Richmond, and this is a gift from him. I'm hoping it's useful to this board, and thank you again for inviting participation of our faculty, and we look forward to more of that. Thank you.
Thank you. The Gifts and Grants Report is a written report in your materials. Please take the time to look at it. We are most fortunate to have very generous donors, and we continue to meet and exceed goals for our capital campaign. There are many in our community who have put their faith in our faculty and students and the great things that are happening at UVA as reflected in their support. So thank you. Jim, I now turn the program over to you for your remarks and discussion items.
All right, thank you. So what I would like to do is spend some time talking with you about the question of requiring test scores for admissions to our undergraduate programs. And we're joined by Ben Castleman, who's an associate professor of public policy and education, and Steve Farmer, our vice provost for enrollment. I will tee it up and then ask them to add a bit more. But before I do that, a few words of thanks and acknowledgement. I too would like to acknowledge this is the 200th anniversary of the first day of class at UVA, and you should have a gift to commemorate the occasion, and I hope you enjoy it. I too would like to share my thanks with Ian. It's a little hard to imagine someone picking Vermont over Charlottesville this particular time of year, but I will miss you terribly. You have been a great partner and contributed an enormous amount to this school. We're better off for your presence, and we wish you the very best of luck. I also want to thank Bree for stepping in while Ian heads north. Bree and I have worked together before, and she is outstanding, and we are all incredibly fortunate that she has agreed to take on this role. Even though he's not here, I'd like to thank Craig Kent for his leadership and his service, but also thank Mitch Rosner for stepping in as acting EVP. I've also worked with Mitch during the COVID days. We tried to introduce him to the university leadership, and everyone said, "Oh, I know Mitch from COVID." He helped us navigate those 2 years. He is incredibly talented and incredibly hardworking and beloved at the health system. And so we are really, really fortunate to have you. Last but not least, I need to add my thanks to Lisa. I feel like this meeting always sneaks up on me because the student rep leaves what seems to me sort of still in the middle of the year. And so I was bereft to learn that this is your last meeting. You have contributed an enormous amount, and you probably don't appreciate the influence you have on this group, given your honesty and given how hard you've tried to represent and have done an incredible job representing the views of students, which I know everyone here cares an awful lot about. So you have handled your position extraordinarily well. So thank you. Okay, so testing. let me tee this up a little bit. So we went test optional during COVID because it was difficult to access the SAT and the ACT, as did a number of schools. And we kept it going beyond COVID, in part because we wanted to see what the impact of test optional was on our admissions, on applications and the like, to make the decision about whether we just continue on with test optional, whether we require testing again as we did before COVID, or whether we do something else entirely. I'm going to let, and we had Ben chair a faculty group that examined a lot of data about what we can tell from the SAT and ACTs, what the impact was on our applicants and on our admissions, to inform the conversation. Let me just give you a few highlights and then I'll turn it over to Ben and to Steve. So first, there's been no difference in retention from first year to second year during test optional, which is one measure of how students are doing. It's a crude measure, but no difference at all, really, in terms of how many students are coming back after their first year, including students who haven't turned in tests. The others is absolutely the case, and Ben and Steve can explain this better than I can, that there is independent predictive value with standardized tests, above and beyond GPA and other elements that we look to in applications. You can learn more about an applicant if you look at their test scores above and beyond what you would find otherwise. The bump that you get, or the increased predictive value, I'll leave to Ben and Steve. It's not as much as you might think. On the downside, there's no doubt that more students applied to UVA during the test optional period, an extraordinarily large number, and many of them first generation students who, when surveyed, said they either would not have applied if we were requiring tests or might not have applied if we were requiring tests. So one of the trade-offs is a broader applicant pool, including first generation students, and knowing a little bit more about the students themselves. Couple of other things, and then I'll stop. We are no school currently, no public college or university in Virginia requires tests. Every other school is test optional, and the only school I know that has a deadline is Virginia Tech, but I think they've said they're going to remain test optional until 2028, but I don't think they've promised to go back to testing. That's just how long their current policy is going to be in place before it's reviewed. Among top public colleges and universities, I don't think any of the public colleges and universities that are ranked in the top 5 require testing. So there is a universe out there where if we went back to requiring testing, we would be different from our peer schools. And the schools that we lose out on when people decide not to come from UVA for in-state students are other Virginia schools. So there would be a bit of a competitive disadvantage. That could be especially true of student athletes who are being recruited, say, at Virginia Tech. That said, my own inclination, but I'm bringing this to you because I'd like to have a conversation and hear your views, is I am not convinced that the increased predictive value is worth requiring SAT or ACT. But I'm also not convinced that we should stay with test optional. So what I am leaning towards is continuing test optional for another year and thinking about whether we can, whether it would be wise to follow a test flexible policy, and maybe a test flexible policy with a cutoff. And let me explain. So test flexible is you need to submit a test score, but you could submit a score beyond the SAT or the ACT. So Yale University allows you to submit an IB score or AP scores as opposed to SAT or ACT. One of the things that Ben and his colleagues found out is that the SOLs, which are a standardized test that students in Virginia are required to take, public school students, provides the same predictive value as SATs or ACTs. So the additional information you get in terms of predicting how someone is going to do grade-wise is equal between the SAT and the ACT and the SOLs. The benefit of the SOLs, obviously, is everyone is required to take them. Doesn't cost anything. And it would have the added benefit of us reinforcing the importance of SOL. So it has a number of attractive features. Whether that could work, whether there are challenges to that, how that would work if obviously SOLs are just given to Virginia students, would it be wise for us to have a test flexible policy where Virginia students could submit SOLs without anything equivalent for out-of-state students? There's just a few things, if we wanted to go that direction, I think worth considering. The other piece about a cut, so if you look at the retention rate across the 2 years, it is not the case that the SAT or ACT would in many instances tell you the difference between someone who's going to succeed or someone who's not. It might tell you the difference between someone who's going to get a 3.3 or a 3.5. What the University of North Carolina does, which gets at the question of making sure you're not, I think this is the intent behind it, you're not admitting students who you're worried just aren't going to make it. They only require standardized test scores for students applicants below a certain GPA. And I think the rationale is if you're below a certain GPA, that creates some concern that you might not succeed. And so for those students, they ask for test scores. So that's where I'm currently leaning, but I would really love to hear your views. And why don't I turn it over to Ben and Steve and correct me where I got it wrong and add where I've left some gaps, and then we can open it up. But thanks. Ben and his colleagues have been working on this all fall, and they did an extraordinary amount of work. There are some parts of the research that he can't talk about because of restrictions with respect to IRB that I can't say I understand, but I appreciate. But he can tell you a little bit more about the work that they did. Thanks for being here.
Great. Thank you, President Ryan. Thank you both for the chance to be here today and for providing us the opportunity to contribute empirical analysis to this very important decision. Thank you, of course, to the board for the chance to share some of what we have learned. And I want to very much thank Vice Provost Farmer, who has been a tremendous collaborator and has provided profound insight as part of our working group. I thought what I might do is just speak for a few minutes about our process in approaching this analysis. I think largely reinforce what President Ryan has already shared as the main results, and then ask Vice Provost Farmer if he's willing to talk about in a little more detail some of the trends we've seen in applications and enrollments since the start of test optional. So process-wise, we were very fortunate to partner with many within the university and externally to assemble a very rich amount of data on our applicants. And that includes both readily observed measures from students' applications to the university, their high school GPAs, their college entrance exam scores, high school context information, as well as information, of course, of their performance when they're at their university, their courses they take, the grades they receive, the degrees they earn, and to a limited extent, some measures of non-academic engagement, participation in student organizations, leadership roles, and so on. We were also tremendously fortunate, as President Ryan alluded, to have the collaboration of the Commonwealth Department of Education, which very generously provided individual data for our public high school applicants on their standards of learning exams. So we have multiple measures of standardized academic assessments. For the pre-test optional cohorts, those applying through the fall of 2020, we observe SAT or ACT scores for all students, all applicants, because it was a requirement at the time. From the application cohorts 2021 and forward, we observe SAT and ACT scores for students who submitted them to the university. I will come back to this. There is a group of students who submitted their scores, but asked that they not be considered in the admissions process. That creates some analytic opportunities for us that I will speak to. And then for virtually all Virginia public high school students, both pre-test optional and post-test optional, we're able to observe that alternate standardized academic assessment measure, their performance on the Virginia Standards of Learning exams. Our primary question of interest when we combine that data on students from their applications and the data on students' primarily academic performance at the university is what do we learn from different measures that are observable during the application phase as it is predictive of largely students' academic success here. I'd like to begin by observing that many factors contribute to students' academic performance at the institution, many of which we are not able to observe in our analysis. There are components of the first year application process, essays, recommendation letters, for instance, that in the time we had are just computationally prohibitive to translate into data. And yet, I imagine Vice Provost Farmer can speak to much better than me, there is information in essays and recommendation letters that I'm sure admissions readers are gleaning that is predictive of student engagement and performance at the university. So there are factors in the application that affect, that are perhaps predictive of how students do that we can observe. And of course, there's many aspects of what happens to students and the choices students make when they are here that affects their academic performance that may be independent of what we can observe in the applications. I stress that because with all of the measures that we can observe, we're able to explain less than half of the variation in student outcomes. Our belief is that that very strongly reinforces the tremendously time-intensive work of holistic review and admissions that our colleagues in enrollment admissions do. Neither test scores, nor GPA, nor any other measure is deterministic about student performance at the university. So that, I think, is one key insight. I will reinforce a point that President Ryan made. Controlling for other readily observed measures, high school GPA, some information about school context, some information about students, like whether they are the first in their family to go to college. Standardized measures of academic achievement are predictive of academic performance at the institution. A way to say that a little bit more simply is that students who score higher on measures of standardized measures of academic assessment that they take during high school, on average, perform higher in, say, their first year courses than students who score lower on those assessments. I do want to stress the on average nature of that. It is also the case that because many factors affect how students do at the university, there is substantial variation within a given score level. We have students who score tremendously high on measures of academic assessment who may have lower GPAs at the university. And the reverse is true. We have students who, on the measures we can observe coming out of high school, may not have performed as well, who are stellar academic students at the university. What we find when we look at explaining the total variation that we can explain in student academic performance, I mentioned a moment ago that with everything we can put into the model, we're explaining less than half of the variation. When we include standardized measures of academic assessment, we increase the amount of variation we can explain in the range of 10 to 20%. That depends on the outcome. That is true both for the SATs and the ACTs. It's also true for the Virginia SOLs. We get about the same, for our in-state public high school students. We, of course, don't observe the SOLs or their equivalent for students applying from other states. But what that means is we're obtaining about the same predictive information from different forms of standardized academic assessment, which in our belief reinforces the value, as President Ryan articulated, of exploring the possibility of text-flexible approaches through which students could provide different forms of academic information. I will make one other quick observation. I'm, of course, I'm very happy to and eager to answer your questions to the best of my ability. Before I turn it over to Vice Provost Farmer to talk a bit about our enrollment trends and matriculation trends, I did want to speak to a concern that some of you might have seen arise with an analysis of the Dartmouth College test optional policy. And in the Dartmouth context, one of the concerns was that students from first generation backgrounds, for instance, with higher scores, were not submitting them when it might have been to their benefit to do so. And this gets to that population that I alluded to a few minutes ago. There's a subset of students who we observe scores for who asked that they not be considered in the admissions process. But we still know we have a population of students who submitted scores, some of whom had them considered in admissions and some who didn't. And we observe no difference by first generation status, for instance, in whether students have their scores considered at a given score level. So it does not appear that a concern that has arisen in other institutions is true at UVA. We see consistent submission decisions for students, both first gen and non-first gen, across the score distribution. Again, I'm very happy to elaborate on anything I've shared to answer your questions, but I'd like to first, if I can, just give Vice Provost Farmer an opportunity to describe some of the trends we've seen in application and enrollment.
Professor Castleman, thank you very much, and President Ryan, Rector Hardy, thank you all. I was going to make a little detour and also say thank you to Ms. Kopelnik. I'm still going to do it even though she's not here. She said that the first time she ever saw the university was when she moved in. First time she saw the university was on move-in day. And I'm just glad she showed up on move-in day. And I'm glad that we were ready for her. And, you know, the comment that she made reminded me of the different choices that people have to make at every point along the way for all of this to work. Admission officers, students have to choose where to apply. Admission officers have to make good choices. Then students have to make choices about whether to show up. And at every point along the way, there's room for error. There's also a little room for wisdom. And part of it is also room for serendipity and the mystery of all of this. And I can't speak as a researcher. I can't speak as a faculty member. I'm not Professor Castleman. I would never be if I tried for a million years. I'm not that smart. I'm a worker in the vineyard. I have been working in the vineyard that I've been working in for a long time. And I've worked alongside a lot of wonderful people, including Professor Castleman on the faculty side, and including people like Jack Blackburn on the practitioner side, who have taught me a lot. And so I have a lot of opinions about the question that you all are going to be discussing today. But for the next couple of minutes, I'm going to try to avoid opinions and I'm going to try to stick to facts, if I may. I promise you I will try to stick to facts. This was a wonderful study that our faculty colleagues led by Professor Castleman conducted, and I hope that you will trust it. I have been involved in a lot of these studies over the years, again, not as a faculty member, but as a practitioner, maybe a dozen or more. At my last school, I was really lucky to have a researcher on staff who did a lot of these things for us. We collaborated with faculty members all the time. I worked with the College Board and other big studies across the country. Never seen a better one than this. I can't say that I was I guess this is an opinion. I can't say I was particularly surprised by the findings because every study that I've ever been involved in and every one that I've ever read has suggested the kind of connection between standardized assessments of learning and eventual grades in college that Professor Castleman just outlined. So I think we should trust the findings, although I'm not surprised by them because that's what we've seen consistently over the years. I think those are facts. Other facts, as President Ryan mentioned, we're in an environment where students have a lot of choices. And a lot of the choices that they have are choices that won't require them to submit test scores. And I just think it's important for us to remember that. Since I started here 4 years ago, We've been focusing pretty intently on students in the Commonwealth of Virginia because honestly, we felt as though we had an obligation to students in the Commonwealth, and we felt as though we had a little bit of ground to make up. And when you look across the Commonwealth, as President Ryan said, right now every other four-year public university in the Commonwealth is test optional, and I would expect most of them to be test optional. Some of them have been for a long time. I would expect all of them to be test optional next year. And again, as he said, Virginia Tech has already indicated its intent to remain test optional through 28. Professor Castleman mentioned, and you've seen, a little information about the changes in application rates and the changes in enrollments. And I will just mention a little bit about that. We have gained a lot of ground in Virginia since we started test optional in reaching really, really talented top students who in the past weren't raising their hands for UVA. And I just want to stress, we are not giving seats at the university away to anybody. That's also a fact. Admission here is hard. You all know that. It's harder today than it was before test optional. We expect a lot of students, and we have folks over in Peabody Hall right now with eye strain, evaluating candidates for admission, trying to make really good decisions as we get ready to release the last round of decisions to students who've entrusted us to try to do right by them. So it's hard to get in here, and we are trying to gain ground in Virginia, not by giving seats away to students who don't deserve to be here, but by encouraging students who do deserve to be here and who have always deserved to be here to raise their hands for the university. If they don't apply, we can't admit them. If we don't admit them, we can't recruit them. And if we can't recruit them, we can't enroll them. And if we can't enroll them, then they won't come here and make life better for everybody else around them. So I think those are all facts, or at least fact D. Some of you may know as well that a priority of the Commonwealth for the last several years, and it's a priority that's been reflected in budgets that the General Assembly has passed and Governor Youngkin has approved. A priority of the Commonwealth has been to try to encourage more lower income Virginians to enroll at UVA and a few other schools that, like UVA, have not traditionally enrolled our share of lower income, really talented students across the Commonwealth. We have gained a lot of ground over the last several years. And again, this is a goal that is integral to elected officials in the Commonwealth. And I would argue, this is an opinion, it's also integral to the university's mission to welcome talented students from all walks of life and develop them to their full potential. We have taken the direction from the Commonwealth very seriously since fall of 2020. The number of lower income Virginians in our first year class has increased by 82%. And the number of first generation college Virginians has increased by 61%. And I just want to say again, we have achieved these gains without compromising our standards. If anything, we expect more of students today than we have ever expected of them before. We're able to admit them because they are in our pool. And I don't think this is an opinion. I think this is a fact. Many of these students are in our pool because we didn't require them to submit their standardized test scores. And so as President Ryan said at the beginning, and now we'll offer an opinion, when President Ryan said at the beginning, I think the way to think about this question isn't whether testing good or bad, test optional. The way to think about it is trade-offs. What we would gain by returning to required testing versus what we would lose by returning to required testing, or you could put that the other way around. We do have other options for hybrid approaches that might enable us to get the best of both worlds. And President Ryan, I appreciate that you are thinking about our having a little more time so that we can test out some of those alternative methods. So with that, I will be quiet unless you would like to correct anything that I said, Professor Castleman, and we will be glad to answer any questions that you have.
Open it up for questions and comments.
Yeah, just really quickly, Jim alluded to the fact of, during his statement regarding the predictive potential of GPA versus testing and the bump that you might get from predictability with regard to testing. Could you share those numbers with us?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thank you for the question. And I'll give two data points that hopefully illustrate this. And as President Ryan alluded, I think we'll have to consult with the Institutional Review Board to share additional detail, but I'd like to offer two. One I shared, but I'll restate because I can probably say it more clearly. When we kind of control for various application measures, and as well, including high school GPA, and we look at the added variation that is explained by SATs or ACT scores above and beyond high school GPA, it's about 10 to 20% increased variation in student academic performance that we explain. I'll also try and frame that in a little different way to make it more concrete. If we consider a student who scores in the 1500 to 1550 range on the SAT, that would put them about the 75th percentile in our distribution. Their average first year GPA is about a 3.72. If we compare that to a student, and that's holding constant their GPA and other measures. If we compare that to a student with who's at the 25th percentile of the SAT distribution, in the 1300 to 1350 range, their first year GPA on average is a 3.42. So higher scores, similar relationships when we look at SOL scores. Higher scores on standardized academic assessments are associated with, on average, meaningfully higher first year GPAs, about a 0.3 GPA difference in the example I just gave. And I do want to reiterate that at the individual level, there's quite a bit of variation. SAT scores or GPA are one of only many factors that affect academic performance at the university.
Quick follow. Can you clarify that first year versus over the course of a student's career? Because I think that's a critical distinction when you're talking about merit. But
yeah, we see that standardized measures of academic assessment provide additional information in predicting both first-year GPA, but also cumulative GPA, for instance. Those relations, we gain additional information from standardized academic assessments, both in initial, but then kind of longer-run GPA as well. Please.
A couple questions. When you say test flexible, do you mean test flexible but not optional?
Yeah.
So you have to take something.
You have to submit some score.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one question is, they currently give ranges of, okay, here's where the average in-state or out-of-state is. And I would assume, my thinking had always been that those ranges were probably artificially high because the people that don't take the test and submit probably would have had lower scores. So that would tend to raise your range. Do you think that's accurate? Because it's kind of misleading, I think. People think that the ranges are super high when they probably are super high because only the best scores are being submitted.
I appreciate your question. We can observe empirically using that subset of students I referred to earlier. There's students we observe scores, most of whom have them considered by admissions, some who don't. And so we can compare the score distribution of those who have them considered in admissions and those who don't. And I think as you inferred, the scores tend to be higher among the students who submit their scores and have them considered in the admissions process. That's consistent with analyses of test optional at other institutions as well.
Second part of my question is, a lot of times I worry about the grade inflation. If your kid goes to a hard school, as Rachel knows, they don't have, they don't have any grade inflation. So I talked to other friends' kids who are getting, 4 or 5s, which isn't even offered at some of the private schools that we went to, or kids went to. So I guess, do you guys that's one advantage of scores is they help sort of see through that. And then I guess the other thing you rely on is just experience and looking at their whole range of grades. I mean, how do you sort of combat that grade inflation?
Thank you for the question. I mean, it's a really great and important one. I think most people who work in my line of work will tell you that grades have edged up over time. High school grades have edged up over time. I also think most people who've worked here will tell you that students here are taking harder classes than they've ever taken before. And we do have other information on a transcript besides just the letter grades that students earn. We also have information about the school as a whole, just about how tough the school is, how the grades trend. And all of those things form a part of the academic assessment of a student's capacity to thrive here. And to go back to a point that President Ryan made earlier, I think for a practicing admission officer, kind of a baseline question that you ask is who will thrive and who will not. And once you've answered the question about who will thrive, then you have another set of questions that you could ask. Who will contribute in different ways here? Who do we need in a particular program? Without offending anyone, who do we need who can hit a three? That's a 3-point shot. Sorry, in case you
We knew what you meant.
All right, I didn't know, I was worried there. There are a lot of things we have to consider besides just, it's not a race to the highest GPA. That's really not what admission here is set up to be, and that's not what the university, anyway up to this point, has told us that it is our job to do. What we've understood our job to do has been to try to put together a group of people who will thrive and will contribute to the common experience of students here on grounds and will be talented in different ways and will bounce off of one another and make each other better for 4 years. And so once we've answered the thrive question, it's an open question as to how much farther we can go actually just to push the academic point. Like what extra little increment of academic excellence do we really need in order to be an excellent institution, as opposed to some of the other kinds of excellence that we need in order to be an excellent institution. So that's more than you asked for, and I'm sorry.
Steve, could I ask another question really quickly, just for clarification? You and I have discussed this at length. It was my understanding that the predictive measure of the GPA provided a certain percentage of reliability to you with regard to your belief that that person would be successful at UVA. I thought that was in the correlation like the 25%. And then that when you added any type of standardized testing or even other testing on top of it, it really only added an additional 4% of predictability. Is that correct, or am I hearing that wrong?
I can answer the question. I'm going to try and answer it in a non-technical way. I think the 4 percentage points is when we add SAT or ACT or SOL on top of a model that already has many other measures. That is GPA and others. But that's a marginal addition. It's not, if you'll forgive the phrase, a horse race between GPA and standardized assessments. And part of it is a function of the sequence in which we add measures to the model. So it would not be accurate to say, for instance, that a model with GPA in it and other things explained 25% of the variation, SAT added 4%, therefore everything else is what is driving most of the variation. It's largely a function of how we're sequencing what gets added in the model. And so if we reversed our sequence, if we just started with SAT and ACT, for instance, we would expect to see much of that variation coming from SAT and ACT, and then we would see marginal increases when we added in other measures. And I apologize for going perhaps too down a technical path. One of the reasons for this is these measures are correlated, right? Mm-hmm. Students who have higher scores on academic assessments, on average, might have higher GPAs. On average, might attend school contexts with more resources. So it's very challenging to isolate the sole contribution of one measure because of these interconnections.
Okay. And may I just add, not as a researcher, but that's consistent with every other study I've ever seen, that whichever measure you start with first, you get the greatest predictive power.
So my question is about rural students. And Mr. Farmer and I, first of all, let me say that I have had prospective students call the admissions office multiple times. They have met with Mr. Farmer or people in his office. I have sent parents to him with questions. I feel like that we have a very kind and caring admissions process that really values our students and is very thoughtful. That being said, I live in a county where there is no SAT prep available. We don't have a Kumon where I live. Students who go to the governor's school, which is, pretty much a virtual governor's school, who take classes through the governor's school have the option to take an SAT prep for free via Zoom. That's a very small subset of students in Southwest Virginia. So these students don't have the opportunities for tutoring. And if they do, it's expensive. They have to travel. Their parents don't know about it. So how do you feel that this benefits some of these more rural students or other students, who are in different economic situations that don't, that's why I like test optional, because I feel like it levels the playing field somewhat.
Ms. Pilling, first of all, thank you very much for what you said. You're the best recruiter we have in Southwest Virginia.
But you may have 3 pillions next year. So.
Well,
I try.
we will
Doing
be very
my part.
lucky, and if there's a fourth, we'll hope for a fourth.
Eventually.
No, I really appreciate the question. I mean, it's absolutely true that if you look across the Commonwealth, students in rural communities are less likely to submit their test scores than those who live in suburban or urban communities. And there are a lot of reasons for that, I'm sure, that you all know better than I. I will say, I was talking with a colleague the other day who mentioned to me, she knows someone who does SAT and ACT tutoring, not in the Commonwealth, but in another part of the country, $650 an hour.
See, many of the students in my county would never, ever dream of paying that or be able to pay that, as would, I think, many students across the Commonwealth.
I will say, when I heard that comment, my eyes kind of lit up. I was thinking, $650 an hour. Okay, maybe that's the next line of work.
Thank you all for this fascinating discussion, and you're to be congratulated on the work. And you and I can geek out someday about whether, what form of multiple regression and whether you got into machine learning models, et cetera, but the larger the sample size, the more precise the variance, which will be explained by those factors. So the larger your sample size, the better clarity you will have about what the additional impact is, and I suspect the sample size was large here. Yeah. One of the other metrics of a college education, some might say it's the primary metric, but one of the key metric is, did you get a job? Or did you get the graduate school placement, or did you get the output of the education that the person was seeking? And so do you have data? The GPA is wonderful because mathematically it allows you to run all sorts of analyses, but the actual metric, or one of the actual metrics, is what happens.
Tremendous question, thank you. And I alluded to this briefly, thanks to, again, tremendous partnership of various units within the university. We have data I mentioned on participation in student organizations. As many of you know, of course, our career services administers surveys to students asking about their experiences after the university, as well as important pre-graduation career exploration events like a summer internship. We did explore factoring that data into our analysis. The response rates tend to be, unfortunately, quite low. In the range of 30% or fewer, depending on the particular survey measure, and it's likely not those who respond may not be representative of the overall student population. And so I think both of those, the low response rate and the non-representative response rate, really limit our ability to incorporate that data to investigate, I think, an important question you're raising: how do measures of academic assessment predict not just performance at the university, but their various career and broader life pursuits afterwards. But it's currently, I think, a prohibitive data constraint. It's a question we would love to investigate. And so as the university potentially identifies opportunities to enhance data collection in those areas, I completely agree with the spirit of the question. It's one we share a lot of enthusiasm around, but face data constraints on investigating.
Can I ask a question?
Of course, please.
Would you consider, Jim, you were talking about a hybrid. I feel as, and I'm a Virginian, I sort of feel we have a moral obligation to our population as the flagship university. Could we do a hybrid where we would demand testing for our out-of-state applicants, but not our in-state students? Because the very point that Amanda made, that there's clearly financial burden that a lot of our citizens can't cover. It's an inequity that's obvious. But I don't know that we have that same obligation to our out-of-state students. Well, applicants, not students.
No, thank you very much, Mr. Brody. I appreciate the question. And it's something that we've talked about internally in admission and enrollment. We like you, we feel like we have a particular obligation to Virginians. And so we always think about the impact on Virginians of anything we're going to do. And if we are able to explore other alternatives, I would expect that to be an alternative that we would explore as well.
Well, since the out-of-state can't take the.
Sort of a question versus a comment, but is there any way to, or if someone sends in their SAT scores, do they get to cherry pick, or if they've taken it 3 or 4 times, do you see all 3 or 4? And is there any way to preclude someone from doing, the coaching? Is there any way that they have to admit that? Because that drives me nuts too. I think if you want to level the playing field, you get to take it once and you turn in your score. That's it.
Those are really great questions, and the answers are no and no. So the College Board and the ACT company both make it really clear that students own their scores. They can cancel their scores, they can delete them, they can send the ones that they want. It's entirely up to the student. I don't think we can influence either the College Board or the ACT, and we could say to students, you must. I think that would put students in a difficult position of having to choose whether to follow our instruction and do what we ask them to do, or pick the scores that they think reflect best on them. And as for taking the test multiple times, I think that ship sailed long ago, and I don't think we can do anything about it.
I'm sorry, Doug.
I have 2 related questions, but I think they'll be easy for you to answer. One is, can you give us some sense for what % of the kids that apply submit scores and what % don't? That's the first question. And then related to that is, one of the things about this is, whatever the predictability of the various information, there's something in here from my standpoint of whatever the rule is, it ought to be the same for everybody. No scores, or you have to do scores, but we have this world where it's you got the people who submitted scores over here and the people who don't submit them over here, and you're trying to compare those different groups of people. That strikes me, I'm not a professional, I've never done it, but it strikes me as if part of what you're doing in admissions is trying to develop some notion of apples to apples, or everyone's in the same bin and you're trying to compare them even. If you've got different sets of data on everybody, it seems like it would make that harder and more complicated, and less fair maybe even.
Thank you very much. I'll address the first question if that's okay, and then turn it over to Vice Provost Farmer for the second. Roughly half of students at this point submit scores. That varies in important ways across region, as Vice Provost Farmer reported. I believe it would be accurate to say that in Southwest Virginia, for instance, the share of students submitting scores is quite a bit lower than, for instance, in Northern Virginia. It also varies importantly across student groups. And so first-generation students submit scores at lower rates than non-first-generation students.
Mr. Whitmer, the second point's a really great one. And, I think, the Cal system schools are test-free, partly for that reason. I think one of the challenges of test optional for families and for students is that students have to figure it out. They have to decide whether to submit a score, whether not to submit a score. I think that would also be a challenge with test flexible. People would have to, it kind of ratchets up, I hate to put it this way, but it ratchets up the gamespersonship of all of this. And that's tough on students, it's tough on families. We try to take the edge off of that for students in a couple of ways. And one is just by telling them, look, whether you submit your score, whether you don't submit your score, you can count on an honest evaluation and a sympathetic one from people in admission at UVA. Our job is not to find any one thing and say, okay, that's the thing that's going to keep you out of the university. Our job is to see you as a whole person and to see all of your achievements and the context in which you've achieved them and try to imagine the difference that you'd make if you came here. And, that's us talking. And sometimes it makes a difference for kids and makes them feel a little bit easier about either submitting or not submitting. And often it doesn't because it's a challenge for them and the stakes are high. Your question really illustrates how complex the policy choice is. There are a lot of things that we could do that could make things better or worse for the university, better or worse for students and families, create a barrier, remove a barrier, and thinking all of that through really carefully, it seems to me makes a lot of sense.
Thanks, Mr. Rector. I'm intrigued by the SOL idea. Talk me because we give the SOL in many different domains, right? How well do those map onto what the SAT or ACT measures, and do you use like a composite or an average score across? You must use like the raw scores or the cut scores they give.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll describe briefly what we're doing analytically, and then I'll just, I think, allude or build on a point Vice Provost Farmer just made. We are using the high school end of course exam scores in our attempts to understand how standardized academic alternatives to the SAT or ACT predict student performance. So something like a Algebra 1 end of course exam. These are, and I should acknowledge I am in training and experience very much not a psychometrician. So I'm giving you the best answer I can. These are intended as criterion referenced exams, right? They're intended to cover to assess what is covered in a given course. That is different than the SAT or the ACT, which are perhaps more broadly intended to measure aptitude in some fashion. I certainly want to acknowledge and reinforce that were SOLs a potential component of a test flexible policy, I think it would be extremely important, and I know Vice Provost Farmer agrees, to engage closely with our colleagues at VDOE and psychometricians at the university to interrogate as deeply as we could the potential use of an SOL in admissions, because that is not I believe it would be fair to say that's not their intent and is not their current use. Students are not currently submitting SOLs. Admissions readers are not currently considering that. We find similar predictive information from SOLs as we do SAT, ACT, but that is not the same as our being able to say they could be used in admissions. That would require a tremendous amount of study and collaboration with our colleagues at VDOE and within admissions. Do you want to add anything? Okay. Or.
Thank you. I seem to remember reading that some other elite institutions outside of Virginia had done a similar analysis and decided that standardized tests were helpful in finding under-resourced students. People stand out. And these might be children who live in rural places that don't have access to advanced placement courses, or they don't have access to extracurriculars, or they don't have access to internships and travel opportunities that urban and suburban kids might. So if I remember that correctly, could you comment on that? And B, if so, is your analysis meaningfully different, or did they just weigh the trade-offs differently? So I don't really understand how to square those two things.
It's a tremendous question. Thank you very much. I'll answer in a couple components, and then I imagine you might have some insights. I'll use the Dartmouth one as an example. That's one that's been released publicly, so we actually can read a lot about what they did, and it's one that's gotten a fair amount of attention. One of the concerns, I don't mean to speak for the researchers or the president there, of course, but one of the concerns that emerges in their report is that students who scored quite highly during a test optional policy were not submitting their scores. They might not have recognized that submitting a 1450 or a 1500 might have been an advantage for them in admissions. So that might have been a behavior that returning to a test required policy was intended to address. We do not see that in our data. as I mentioned briefly, for the subset of students for whom we observe scores, most of whom do have them considered, but some of whom don't, we don't observe that students with higher scores from, say, first-generation backgrounds are strategically withholding them. Why the results might be different, I think I think would be hard for us to answer because of differences in the application pool or the review. Vice Provost Farr might have additional insights to offer you.
Speculation, not insights. The conversation about admission practices, on a national level, it kind of talks about admission as being admission, and it's admission from one place to the other. There are these things that people do. Students file applications, people read them, and then they either get in or they don't. And so the conversation is kind of describing universal admission, but there's no such thing as universal admission. It's a little bit different or a lot different at every school, depending on what the school values, depending on how people are trained, depending on what the schools are trying to achieve, and depending on who is actually reading the application. And so this is not based on evidence, this is speculation, but for example, a school that weighs testing more heavily or that weighed testing more heavily to begin with might find the kind of result that you just described. There were some students who didn't have test scores. If they had submitted them, it would have helped them get in. If the school weighed testing pretty heavily, then maybe that's an outcome that you would see at a school like that. I think here, our admission folks have been really good for a long time at painstakingly going over every application, really every line of the transcript, trying to figure out what every line means. Trends in grades, grades themselves, courses that students have taken, how the grades trend at the school, everything like that. And in a process like that, and again, I'm not disparaging anyone else's process, and this is all speculation, the things that we were seeing and valuing before from students who were with lower test scores who were submitting them, we are still seeing and we're still valuing today. And because we weighed those things pretty heavily to begin with, our not having test scores is not keeping those students out of our admitted pool. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, it sounds like the essays are still a very important part of the application process. I'm wondering how you control for the use of GPT.
It's a great question, and it's a work in progress. I mean, that's the most honest thing to say. And one of the things that we hope to do, again, if we haven't worn out our welcome with our faculty colleagues, and if they will continue to work with us, we want to put some brain power to the question that you just asked, and make sure that what we're actually seeing in essays or in any other component of the application is something that's real. And we're also open to exploring with just different approaches to admission in a machine age that might help us do a better job. So, again, I'm not disinterested in saying this. I think we've done a pretty good job. But that doesn't mean that the way we're doing things today is the way that we're going to be able to do them 2 or 4 years from now because of the change that you just described.
Yes, Carlos.
Rachel, did you?
Oh, Rachel, I'm sorry. Yeah.
So a couple times you've mentioned the idea that there's certain applicants that submit their scores but ask for them not to be included in the application. I find that fascinating. Can you just talk about why they might do that and how many students? It's come up in a couple different things that you've said, and it seems like a very strange
I can answer the second part of the question, how many students do that. Why, I will defer to Vice Provost Farr. I interpret why in part of kind of when in the process do they share scores and when might they withhold them before they're considered. Of the students who do not, whose scores are not considered in admissions, about 20% have submitted scores.
I'm going to speculate again. So before I came over here, I was talking with a really, really bright student who is really hoping to come here. And this is, like so many of our candidates, this is a student, she's never done a thing wrong in her life. Seriously. I talked to her for 10 minutes and I was thinking, would you, my wife and I are empty nesters, you want to put yourself up for adoption, we are your family. And hearing her talk about her experience with this, she's really poised and composed, and we would love to have her here. But she's she's second guessing everything she's done. What if I'd done this? What if I'd done that? And I think that's what that is. And of course, you know, when someone submits a score and doesn't let us use it, we can't sit with them in the moment and say, look, you know what? With your score, without your score, you have no reason to second guess yourself. I mean, you hold your head high when you come to us. You're not a beggar at our table. But I think students often feel like beggars at our table. We don't want them to feel that way, you know? But I think that's what is driving what you just heard, what you were talking about.
Yeah, I want to come back to Amanda's point about the socioeconomic factors in test scoring. And one of the things that's been appealing to me about the use of SOLs is that there's a normalization, because whether it's good or bad, if you're in Virginia, the school systems are teaching and preparing the students for those tests. So every student has an opportunity to prepare for it, to take the test, and of course there are socioeconomic and familial factors that can impact that, but it seems to me to be significantly more appealing for normalizing the differentiation between resourcing, of kids. Like my kid had Kumon and tutoring and all that stuff, and he did very, very well, but I couldn't have had that. And I often wonder how much of a factor is that resourcing show up in the standardized testing. And if we're building a class or a university that's available to all, irrespective of where you start and what resources your parents have, then it seems to me that an SOL model levels that, whereas SATs and other SAT tests and ACT tests can be manipulated based upon resourcing. So I don't know, how does that show up in your analysis?
Well, thank you for the very valuable perspective. It doesn't show up in our analysis. That's not something I can speak to from an empirical perspective. I think you were right to point out that the Virginia SOLs are nearly universally taken by public high school students in the Commonwealth. I have a 9th grader and an 11th grader at Charlottesville High School. My 9th graders' teachers are very mindful of the approaching SOL exams. So I think you're right to say there is a universality that might reduce socioeconomic difference in access. And there is also some importance in school-based preparation. I also would emphasize, and again, this is one of the many reasons why I believe we would, as a university, want to very carefully study SOLs as a potential input in the admissions process, both internally and with colleagues at VDOE. What we don't know is how differences in SOL preparation might arise were the University of Virginia to signal openness to considering them as an input. It may be the case that if a family could submit an SOL, that could create incentives to start seeking out extracurricular preparation resources for the SOL in the way that some families do currently for the SAT and ACT. So that's a hypothesis, but it's a potential incentive, I think, it would bode us well to be mindful of, depending on the path forward that President Ryan and Vice Provost Farmer and colleagues pursue.
So Jim, were you suggesting, so if you go test flexible, in state you have 3 options, but you have to take one. If you're out of state, do you have to take one of the 2?
Yeah.
So it's no longer a test option for out of
Right,
state.
yeah. The difference between test flexible and test optional is you've got to submit a test. And one of the questions that would be raised if we went down this route is, would we be okay with a system where if you're in state, you have the option of the SOLs, but if you're out of state, you don't have a similar option? That's just one of the questions. I know we're out of time. I wonder, my sense, but tell me if I'm wrong, is that it would be wise to let them explore this a bit more, keep test optional for now, and come back with maybe a few options that we can consider about whether we want to just stay test optional, whether we want to make it simple and require SAT, ACT, or whether we want to do this hybrid approach. We didn't really talk either, and we can the next time, about using a GPA cutoff in order to require testing.
Isn't that what North Carolina does?
Yeah, yeah. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah.
Okay, no, that sounds great.
Okay.
But it will continue to study and all that. If I may offer a hypothesis from a sample size of one, which you're familiar with, my fourth son Eddie, who's going to UNC Chapel Hill. So there you go. That's a little bit hard for his
I
old
noted
man,
the
though.
pause.
But I know you're thrilled about that. No, I'm thrilled. But I mean, you look at this and you're thinking about applying to the University of Virginia, and you've taken the SATs, and you look at the fact that the 75th percentile is 1540. Well, if you don't have 1540 or above, you're thinking, why do I want to submit? Because I'm going to be in the middle of the pack or below the pack, and is that going to really help me or hurt me? So I agree with you that sometimes the family and the individual applicant is struggling about whether to submit and whether that will have an impact or not. Once again, I don't know the answer to that, but it is something I would consider.
And I know we're at time, and I'm sorry, Rector Hardy, to follow you, but we mentioned in the handout that students have told us on the surveys that we've conducted that if we ask them to submit testing or ask being a euphemism for force, if we force them to submit testing, we'd lose a lot of students. And we would lose a lot of candidates. And the candidates we'd lose would be disproportionately among those who are lower income students or students who are the first in their families to go to college, and it's for the reason that you described.
Okay, thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate the work.
Right, yeah, absolutely. Okay. So we're now going to move on to closed session. So we have a motion to read us into closed session. Yes, thank you, David Webb.
Mr. Rector, I move that the Board of Visitors go into closed session to consult with legal counsel and receive legal advice about specific legal and regulatory matters, including potential and actual litigation, to discuss and consider elections, appointments, performance, promotions, salaries, resignations, and retirements of specific officers and employees. The relevant exemptions are sections 2.2-3711A, 1, 7, and 8 of the Code of Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Webb. We have a motion to go into closed session. Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. We'll wait for the room to clear before we begin. I ask that the board,
Which were identified in the motion authorizing the closed session were heard, discussed, or considered in closed session.
we have a motion to go out of closed session. Do we have a second?
Second.
Ms. Harris, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Hardy.
Aye.
Mr. Brown.
Aye.
Mr. Blue. Mr. Brody.
Aye.
Mr. Ellis.
Aye.
Mr. Gillum.
Aye.
Mr. Harris.
Aye.
Dr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Manning. Mr. Now. Dr. Okonkwo.
Aye.
Mr. Payne.
Aye.
Ms. Pillion.
Aye.
Ms. Sheridan.
Aye.
Mr. Webb.
Aye.
Mr. Wetmore.
Aye.
Ms. Wilkinson.
Aye.
Mr. Kennedy.
Aye.
Ms. Kopelnik.
Thank you. We are now out of closed session and back into open session. If everyone's amenable, I'd like to just go right into final session and we can keep going. Is that fine with everybody? Okay. We are now in final session. I refer you to the printed docket, which is in your materials and which you received in advance of this meeting. The docket has the full text of the resolutions on which we will vote. These resolutions have been approved earlier by the committees in which they originated, or they come out of closed session discussion. Mr. President, would you please read the titles of the consent and action items in the docket?
Sure. I'll read you what I have. Signatory authority for Care Fusion Solutions LLC and Siemens Medical Solutions USA contracts exceeding $5 million per year. Namings, Garrett Drive and Hetherington Drive at Fontaine Research Park. Namings, Carl Smith Way and Whitehead Road. Naming, Harrison Family Olympic Sports Center. Naming, Jeffrey Cudlip Memorial Court. Addition to the major capital plan, mail order and specialty pharmacy expansion. Addition to the major capital plan, satellite clinical lab at Town Center 4, that's planning and design authorization. the Pelican Professorship in Neuroscience, Women's Midlife Health Professorship, Lewis F. Ryan 73 Research Professorship in Law, Donald Black Professorship in Holocaust Studies, Paul Tudor Jones Jefferson Scholars Foundation Distinguished University Professorship in Climate and the Environment, Melville Foundation Jefferson Scholars Foundation Distinguished University Professorship number 2, Degree Program Discontinuation Master of Arts in Asian Studies in the College and Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, D, Degree Program Discontinuation Master of Arts in Chemistry in the College and Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, University of Virginia Enrollment Projections through Academic Year 2031-2032, Major Capital Project Financial Plan for Mail Order and Specialty Pharmacy Expansion, Transfer of Virginia Guest House to the University of Virginia Foundation, Signatory Authority for Academic Division Contracts with Ernst & Young, a care benefits provider, and a system implementation firm that each exceed $5 million per year, and the Audit Department updated charter.
And that, does that include the motion in that motion?
Right. And then a resolution of the University of Virginia regarding the Presidential Executive Order on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion.
May I have a motion to approve the following, the consent and action items in the docket and faculty personnel actions discussed in closed session?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Great. I will now read the motion on the student and faculty representatives for the academic year 2025-2026. I move that the Board of Visitors appoint Gregory Pearman as student representative for the period June 1, 2025 to May 31, 2026, and James Lambert as faculty representative for the period July 1, 2025 to June 30, 2026. May I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Congratulations to our new student and faculty representatives-elect. Is there any other business that the board would like to discuss? If not, this meeting's adjourned. Thank you. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Got a conference.